If you have ever owned a slave, please raise your hand. Slavery is not our fault. We didn't do it. We didn't cause it, but it is our shared history.
Slavery had nothing to do with the war.
And so if I make the statement to you, America was founded on white supremacy.
Lynchings or hangings took place here.
It's a genocide, it's an ethnic cleansing.
The bodies were dumped all the way where the underpass is, and they intentionally put the interstate on top of their bodies.
It's ingrained in my memory. I'm just looking at him in the ditch with his eyes open.
My daddy sat on the carport right here in a lawn chair with a shotgun across his lap because he was going to be ready if somebody came to the house.
There must be a revolution of values in our country.
I cannot look at that video in its entirety.
And my brother did not deserve to die unarmed with his hands in the air.
It will never get easier to have an honest discussion about race in America than it is right now. Because if we wait, it is only going to get harder.
My name is Gil Robertson. I'm president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today, we're thrilled to be talking to the creators responsible for this brilliant documentary. And we are going to, it sounds like, have a very spirited conversation. I'm going to start off by introducing you to Katia Woods, our facilitator today, who is normally based in Philadelphia, but today she's in a luxury hotel in New York City. Reggie Pounder, who is in Chicago, Nancy Green in Baltimore, Karan Noir in Virginia, and Rhonda Rasha Henrise in Atlanta. I'm gonna let you guys do what you do so well, and I will see you on the other side.
Hi, you guys. I agree with Gil. Thank you so much for the project. And I don't even know where to start because it just makes you swim, all the stuff that you guys put out there. And I guess I want to ask Emily 5 questions. I want to ask Sarah 15, and then I want to ask you like 25, Jeffrey. But I guess I'll just start with you first, Jeffrey. Is that this whole thing about not knowing our history is somewhat embarrassing to me, to be at the age that I am, to be learning the stuff that I'm learning and not knowing certain things. And so you kind of spoke to that yourself, but could you speak more to that? Because I'm really upset that I don't know half of the stuff that I should know.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having us. And one of the things that was most difficult for me when I started doing this research was an overwhelming feeling of guilt and a feeling of being ignorant, and feeling like I had no excuse for it because, you know, people have said we're men of a certain age. I was born in '56. I grew up right in the middle of the civil rights movement. There are scenes from the film that talk about integrating a Catholic school and buying a house in a white neighborhood. This is stuff I was walking into when I walked out the door of my house. And yet when I started doing this research and started finding these historical facts that I had never heard of before, I felt like a fool. And it took me a while before I forgave myself. And it's just like, okay, it was in the 50s and 60s and Al Gore hadn't invented the internet yet. So, you know, where is it that you go to find this information? And so I thought I can blame my teachers now. That's who I can blame. And then I thought, well, how are they going to teach it if nobody ever taught them? And so I went from the feeling of ignorance and the feeling of being guilty to a feeling of, I wonder how many other people are in the same boat that I am. And that's how I was able to continue to move forward with this. And, you know, I continue to this day as I do this work to discover things I had never heard of.
Wow, thank you for that. I'd be very interested in, with you guys as well. Sarah, did you guys feel like you were learning some new stuff and actually being hidden from you as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first time I mean, this film started when I had the opportunity to hear Jeffrey give his presentation. I'm Sarah, by the way. Nice to meet everyone. And I'm a lawyer, and it was a continuing legal education presentation that we're required to take to keep our licenses current. To be honest, it was given by lawyers, so my expectations were low, because even things that sound interesting can be worse when lawyers are involved. So, so I went with low expectations. I didn't know who Jeffery Robinson was, and I couldn't pick my jaw up off the floor after after hearing him, and I immediately, I was angry, but I was also determined to. I was like, how to share it, right? How do I, how do I, how do we get this information out there? And the first thing I did was call my sister here, who is my filmmaking partner, and enlist her in this project of how do we help, if we're not informed, how do we help other people get better informed, and how do we help this wonderful presentation get out to the world?
And we went to fairly progressive schools. We grew up in a house with two civil rights attorneys, and we're taught about how to be anti-racist from a very young age, and we were blown away. We hadn't heard of a lot of the things that came out in Jeffrey's presentation. I mean, I was just thinking, one of the 3/5 clause, right? I mean, that was something that we were taught about in school, but we were taught about it as a way to dehumanize, Black Americans at the time, enslaved Black Americans, that it was a way to deny them their humanity. But instead, from Jeffrey, we learned that it was actually a way for the Southern states to maintain their ability to own other human beings as property, right? So it's like you're taught about something one way with good intentions, right? But still with lacking the entire context and truth.
Wow, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Katia Woods Capasso. I really appreciate this film because there's such a big discussion on I didn't own slaves. And I love how Jeffrey connects the dots, that people are not, and even now with the whole CTR thing, which is really crazy. What can we do? Because the thing I don't see in the reporting, and Jeffrey, again, you did such a great job, is we only are getting the white parents' point of view on the education and what we're taught. It is very sad that most of us had to attend someone's university in order to get some type of accurate Black history, unless you were fortunate enough to go to a grammar school or high school where they did teach you that. I did not have James Baldwin in my high school honors English or AP English.
Right.
We had it at my house, but not in any of those things. So what would you say as far as that discussion? Because again, Jeffrey points it out that while you may not have owned slaves, you're the recipient of that system where you are always highlighted and benefited and shown to be an asset to the country, whereas we're just kind of there.
Well, it's a hard thing, but I would say that all of the uproar that you hear about critical race theory and how horrible it is, first of all, it's a law school curriculum. So fourth grade parents saying, don't teach my kids critical race theory. It's don't worry, they can't get it until they get to law school. So why are you so concerned about what your kid is going to be taught when it's not even taught in the school? And I think if you look at some of the images of the history that we try and portray in this film, when you see Josephine Bowling McCall and hear her talk about what happened to her father, it's this moment where people have to say, oh my God, that actually happened. And those moments, those naked lunch moments, are part of what we think can turn this country in a different direction. That's why people don't want this history taught, especially not to younger people, because they know if this history is taught in schools around America, kids are going to grow up saying, this is unacceptable. We have to do something about this. And the lack of knowledge of why it looks like it does in America today is one of the major roadblocks to coming up with solutions that will actually work. And so I think people are afraid of losing their privilege. And just think, and other people have said this, but just how ashamed of your past do you have to be when you try and deny people the facts about it? And when you try and erase it from history, just how bad is it when that's your reaction? I think that should tell us something. And the Who We Are Project intends to be a voice going forward to get this information out to people of all ages, people of all races, and people in different strata of the economy.
I would just add to that teaching white children that racism, that anti-Black racism is systemic and endemic to our country is not about making white children feel bad about themselves. It's giving them the tools so they can come together with Black children, with children of all races, to be the future and end this and solve this, right? It's not, it's, I mean, if they, racism is not, it's not an individual problem. It's not, you know, it's not about individual prejudice. That's not the issue. That's never been the issue. And if we pretend that that's it, it becomes, well, that person is racist, but I'm not. So I'm not part of the problem because I don't have personal prejudice against people, against Black people or people of color. And that's not it, right? And that's what the right is scared of, right? That's what the opposition is scared of, is once we all learn, once the children learn that this is a systemic problem, they're going to want to figure out how to solve it. They're going to want to take responsibility for it. Taking responsibility for it is not a bad thing, right? Taking responsibility for it is how we all move towards liberation.
If I can just, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but Sarah, thank you for that so much. And I think there's a corollary to that, which is if you are teaching your children, no, this critical race theory stuff, that's not the truth. Everything is fine. Everything is fair. Then their children are going to be looking at the way the world is and saying, oh, well, I guess it's those Black people's fault that this is happening to them. And so by being afraid of teaching the truth, you are reinforcing what is already there. And that is tragic.
Hi, Nancy Green with Film Critique. And Jeffrey, thank you so much for making this movie. And also Sarah. One of the issues for me with this movie was it was very difficult to watch. And I wanted to know if you could speak upon some of the issues, like was just mentioned, of systemic racism. Because I think one of the things that people don't notice is, like how you mentioned with Francis Scott Key, you know, we're taught the national anthem in school. We're taught these things in school without knowing the background of these people. And I think a lot of times people find it very difficult to understand that with racism, it's not just about whether or not you like someone based on the color of their skin, but not understanding that because it's systemic, you can be looking at people differently, their struggles differently. Like what you said, white privilege is not about saying that you didn't have any struggles, without people realizing that they're actually doing that, because our foundations are so built on these things, and a lot of people don't take the time to question that. So I wanted to know if you could go into that.
I want to answer that, and I'm also interested in Emily's view, because what I'm going to say is really about narrative. The power of narrative is one of the most powerful things in human existence, and you know, you've just hit a button for me, because this goes all the way back to the caves of Altamira, which is a song by the group Steely Dan from the 70s. And it describes the discovery of these cave drawings in Altamira, France, that were like 15, 20,000 years old, it's about 10,000 years before the Sumerians, who most historians agree were the first culture to use written language, before they even started doing that. So before there was written language, human beings were telling stories about how the world worked. They would draw on the walls the pictures of the animals they had to hunt and their footprints and their scat and what they looked like, and pictures of the tribe hunting them, so they could pass those stories down to the rising generation so they could understand the world that they were coming into. And so the narrative that of America is a narrative that is, maybe we had some problems with slavery, but then there was the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, and everything is fine now. And so that narrative is really hard to break unless you go deep into, the kind of major bells, if you will, that support that narrative. And so you mentioned Francis Scott Key and the national anthem, and there is so much pride that's tied into that, and so much controversy over how dare you Black athletes kneel when that's being played. And it's like, well, do you actually know what that song is about? And do you actually know who wrote it? And once you hear that, many people, I'm not saying everybody, but many people are going to have one of those naked lunch moments going, wait a minute, this is more complicated than I thought. And when they have that moment, that's the moment that a lot of Americans are afraid of.
We were very concerned as a group with the trauma that this could bring up in a lot of viewers, particularly Black and brown viewers. And in fact, there was a long conversation about whether we put something at the end to offer some resources, because we didn't want to leave people. We wanted people to feel empowered. We know that it's hard to watch, but we didn't want the primary feeling leaving to be, we didn't want to hurt people, harm people more than they already are being harmed by society. But we also made choices within the film that we thought could show the material, could not compromise the story, but would show it in a way that was different and respectful. So, for example, you'll see there's a lot of use in the section on lynching. We use a lot of photographs, historical photographs, the postcards that were sent around the country after lynchings. But instead of focusing on the Black bodies in those photographs, like the photographs intended, we tried to focus on the audience. So you would see the reaction, the faces, the smiles. So those people would be held to account. Many of them are probably still alive. Certainly their children are, and their grandchildren are. So we made choices like that. And the other choices that we made that I think were significant to the narrative is that we wanted to tell the stories that hadn't been told. We know a lot of this history touches on areas that people do know about already, like the I Am a Man March and King's assassination. So we wanted to do that in a new way, and we wanted to highlight untold stories and give voice to people who hadn't had an opportunity before. So we told that story through the perspective of the murder of Larry Payne, who was in either 17 or 18 at the time. 17, who was killed by a police officer with a shotgun held directly to his stomach. And he was killed just was it 4 days before King was killed? Right.
It was 1 week before King was killed.
Before King was killed. So we tried to tell stories like that, like the story of that Jeff already mentioned, of her name's flying out of my head. Joe Bowling, whose father had been lynched. So we tried to tell stories that hadn't been told before. So those were some of the choices that we made.
And in terms of how you teach this, or when nobody's teaching it, right? One of the reasons why Jeff is so powerful is because he is a citizen historian. He is an amateur historian. He is someone who realized that there was something lacking and went out and found firsthand resources himself. And one of the things that we would like the film to encourage young people to do, and one of the focuses of the Who We Are project, which is Jeff's organization, which kind of grows out of this talk, is to encourage young people not to rely on the history books. To, you know, they're so, you know, when you look at culture wars and debates about what history is and what the truth is and what the Confederate flag means, right? You know, Jeff says in his talk, go back to the primary sources, go see, when people do something important, they write it down. So go back and look what at the primary source material to what the states said themselves. So to the extent that this film and the Who We Are project can encourage young people to do that, go back to the primary sources to learn the true history of their country, go to their grandparents and parents and find the history, the forgotten histories of their families, because that's American history. And learning history that way, by, you know, going to your family, going to your community, going to your local graveyard, going to the primary sources, is a political act. It's a radical political act in 2021, right? To do that, to find truth.
Thank you so much. And I think that it was beautifully done. Even though it was a difficult movie to watch, it was still it was very engaging and educational. It was one of the harder things about it was seeing the foundations of Tulsa, the Tulsa massacre, yes. The foundations of the houses. So, thank you.
I will just say that we were in Tulsa on 2 different occasions in the end of 1999 and beginning of 2020 because Mother Randall was sick and we couldn't get a film with her, and we didn't actually talk to her until in the middle of the pandemic. But the time we spent with the local activists in Tulsa learning about what that neighborhood was and how it came about, and you know, we didn't get I guess, right, it was 2019 and 2020 is when we were in Tulsa, but learning that stuff was amazing. And when they took us to those stairs, that was a very difficult moment for me because of where I grew up in Tennessee. And if you've grown up in the South and you're of my age, that image of stairs leading up to where the house would be, and you could even see where the driveway was for some of them, where their cars would be. I had just seen those things time and time again in Black neighborhoods in Memphis of people who were trying to move into the middle class. And just to see what happened and have those local activists who were so steeped in that information guide us was something I'll never forget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karan. I am from Karanism.com. And I thought I knew what I was going to ask you, but this has changed. The thing that made me revisit this whole work over and over again was the fact that I grew up in a Black city. And I now live in a place called Charlottesville. Which is one of the most racially charged places on the earth. Mm-hmm. But one thing I can't forget is the painful beauty of the story of Terrence Crotcher and his twin sister. And it was positioned so that he could actually deliver his own sermonic hymn. I'm a church girl. Mm-hmm. He gave his own sermonic hymn, and you gave him permission to give his own benediction. And my heart wept. And every part of these stories, every part of this story. And I want to know, how has faith guided this work? And I want to know, look, just wow. Okay, just wow. It was haunting. And I remember Dr. Tiffany Crutcher his twin sister, stating that no one ever humanized her brother. That stuck with me. It still sticks with me to this day. I learned so much. I thought I knew about our history. I thought I'm a journalist. Like I am, this is like my work, my life, right? I thought I knew what I was doing. And I heard and learned and experienced. I had this experience. This is one of the most remarkable documentaries I have ever experienced in my whole Black life.
I just want to thank you for your words, and there are a lot of things that brings to mind for me, and I've already talked about understanding what you're saying about, how did I not understand the depth of this? And one of the most moving moments in the film for me is when, and now my memory is going, when Senator Hank from Alabama, is it Sanders?
Sanders, yeah.
Was saying at the very end of our time that we spent with him, he was saying, 50 years later, we're still fighting for all these things. And that shows you the depth of white supremacy in America. And I didn't understand that. And when he says those words, I didn't understand that, his voice was actually breaking. And for me, that was just, it was a chilling moment, just to see him trying to reckon with that. And one of the things that I think is so important, and one of the things that I'm so proud about, is that I was a deputy legal director at the ACLU. I wasn't looking to make a movie. I was doing this presentation because I felt like I had to. I felt like I know this stuff now, and I can't just sit on it. I had no vision that this could ever be a documentary until Sarah and Emily walked into my life. And that was coincidence. As Sarah said, she just happened to be in the audience. And when they first came to me and said, we want to make this a film, I was laughing. I thought that's sweet, but that's ridiculous. I'm not a film person. I don't know how to do that. Obviously they did. But this film is the product of a lot of work that could not have been done without the highest level of trust between the three of us. And it's two white women who give me a call and say, let's make a movie about this. And I knew their last name and I knew what that meant. But I also know that, kids and their parents aren't always on the same page. And I started asking people about Sarah, because I know criminal defense lawyers who knew her. And I saw the work that she and Emily did on the film about their father. And then they came to me saying, this is your story, not our story. You will decide what is in the film, not us. Of course, they know how to make a film. And so they're saying, we think this is good. But I had final editorial control. Jeff, you own the film, not us. So every penny we get from Sony Pictures Classics is going to the Who We Are Project, the organization that I left the ACLU to found because I felt like this moment and this work was so important. I could not have done this without Sarah and Emily. And I think there's coincidence involved, but I think there is importance in white and Black people working on this film together.
Yes,
because this is it's not on me to tell this story for white people to understand. This is an issue for all of us. And I think the film is better because of the collaboration between the three of us. And so that's something that I think is really special. And I think you can see it if you watch the film.
I want to thank you for me and for my children. And I have 4 grandchildren that will learn of this work because I'm going to make sure they know of this work. This floored me, and it took time to work through this work as a Black woman. This is a story of true allyship. It's the truth of what happens when we do work together, and when people understand the power, the passion, and the pain that our people have lived through. I am eternally grateful. There has not been a documentary that has moved me in this way in my entire Black life. This has been painful and beautiful. And I thank you. I thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, it's Rhonda. I guess I feel a little bit more hardened because I am a history person. And I wrote the book that's behind me. I went to Ole Miss and Southern Studies. So when I'm watching it, I'm in the amen corner. Like, and I didn't even have an idea that people were hiding it, because I can tell you, even when I was at Columbia, and definitely when I was doing Southern Studies at Ole Miss, none of this stuff was censored. It is there out in the open for all to see. But what's very interesting, and one of the things that you do from the very beginning, is because so much of our history is so convenient to blame the South and to say that there's only one region of the country that has been anti-Black. But when you start to tie it into the economic engine that has literally fueled and built the whole country, and people conveniently let themselves off the hook because they weren't concerned where the money was coming from. But I wanted to, it's very interesting also to me that it would take lawyers, because people do not realize how weaponized the law is against us, and how in many ways it's these laws that keep that engine of white supremacy running, that systemic oppression running. So I wanted you to speak a little bit on that, like, stepping into this kind of space and how instrumental it's been that you have a law, you know the law.
That's a really good question, because remember, I went to law school, and I was a state public defender for 5 years, a federal public defender for 3 years, and then in private practice for 27 years before I ever went to the ACLU. I was a criminal defense lawyer. And the reason that once I started doing this presentation, a lot of the people I was giving the presentation to were in the criminal legal system, because I just saw how there was so much racial bias at every step in the criminal legal system, that I was originally thinking, I want to show this to people so they understand why there's 40% of us making up the prison population, even though we're 13% of the population. That is an extraordinary, extraordinary number that is not repeated in any other country in the world, to have that kind of discrepancy. So that was my original motivation. And I think being a lawyer made me a little less afraid of what Sarah calls us, is what she accurately describes as being like an amateur historian, because it's like, well, I know what, if I want to see like the Constitution of the state of Virginia, I know how I can go find that. And once you're on the state of Virginia's historical website, well, let's use the state of Mississippi as an example. And what you say about what you're learning is Ole Miss, you say, you're right, it's not hidden. It's right there. All you got to do is go look. And so as a lawyer, I think maybe there were places that I figured I could go look to find this stuff. And once I started doing it, obsession is kind of an ugly word, but there was a period when I was a bit obsessed about it, because I just kept thinking, if I turn one more page, what else am I going to find? And I would find something and think, this is the hallmark of what I'm trying to say. And 2 weeks later, I'd find something that made that hallmark look almost insignificant. And so being a lawyer, I think, and at least being trained to question what you're being fed, and maybe to go look for sources. In a criminal case, when a witness tells me I saw A, B, and C, I don't just like accept that. I'm like, was it day or night? Was there a street light or not? Did you wear glasses or not? I want to get into the details because that's where the devil is most often, is in the details.
There's also a lot of overlap between the documentary community and the legal community. I mean, I know a lot of lawyers that have become documentary filmmakers and vice versa. And I think a lot of it has to do with narrative and storytelling, because it's all storytelling, you know? I mean, Jeff, through this film, is making an argument, you know, and building an argument and building a case. And that's really what storytelling is. So I think it's totally natural that lawyers participated in the creation of this.
I did too. I was going to be a lawyer, but
you still might be.
No, I took when I was at Columbia, I took Law and American Society with Rosalind Rosenberg. And one of the, it's so freaky now because at the time I never even visited Georgia, but I did my paper on laws that are still on the books that have never been repealed. And my argument was, you know, if the tide of the country changes, you don't even have to pass laws. They're already there.
Exactly. Exactly.
And we are seeing that.
Hi, guys. Reggie Ponder again. It's so funny because Karan was talking about how I moved her, and then Rhonda's like, yeah, she was in the amen corner. I think I was just vacillating between both, like, oh, yep, no. And so I don't stand for the national anthem. I haven't, once I found out about the third verse, I don't stand, I don't kneel. And I think that what Colin did is a little bit different. I mean, kneeling was, he was really trying to show some respect to that. I don't stand because I'm not trying to show any respect to that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to respect something that disrespects me. That's my commentary. My question is that I think what you guys did here, and I'd like to hear from all of you guys if possible. I think what you guys did here is you're saying who we are, but I really think it comes across as a statement, but I think it's really a question, because you're asking that question is what's the next direction. So I'd like you guys to speak to that. Is it a statement or is it a question?
It is a question. I think it, you know, the title comes from conversations that we were having, you know, about when things happen and the knee-jerk response is, this is not who we are, right? This doesn't reflect us. You know, when Black people are murdered by cops, this is not who we are. And then the question is, right, well, if this is not who we are, who are we? And, you know, until we understand who we are and that this is very much who we are, we're never going to get to that next place of who we want to be. You know, who we may wish we were already aspirationally. So I think, yes, it is a question, it is a statement, it is an aspiration, it is all of these things. And it's, you know, it is, you know, who do we want to be? And, you know, ultimately.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. It's about taking responsibility, you know, and then as soon as, and then it stuck, right? And it became the title of Jeff's presentation, and it became the title of the film. Although we wish now that our film didn't start with the W, because it's the lowest listed alphabetically of any other film.
Exactly.
But we love the title. You know, I mean, you see Jeff's shirt. This actually comes from a part of the enemy is us. You know, and we embrace that, because it's not about, you know, self-flagellation. It's about taking personal responsibility. We are our own worst enemy, but we are also the solution to our problems.
Years ago, I heard Cornel West give a presentation, and at the end there was a Q&A, and someone asked him, does America have a chance to go in a completely different direction when it comes to racial justice? And his response was, the evidence isn't in yet. It's not clear. It could go either way. We don't have enough information yet. And I never forgot that. And the whole concept that runs through the film of the tipping points in in the history of a country that's 4 centuries old, they don't last for a minute or for a year. Tipping points can last for a decade or more. And we are still in the middle of the tipping point that I was talking about back in 2018 when we did the filming at Town Hall Theater. That tipping point is still where we are at, and it is uncertain which way we're going to go. And that uncertainty for me, I think, is demonstrated by, and this is what the truth does, it just makes you go, whoa. What do you think it would look like if America was really about to turn in a completely different direction and deal with racial justice in a real way? What would it look like? People would be going crazy. There'd be an insurrection on January 6th. There'd be people yelling and screaming about critical race theory. Don't teach that, because the folks who have benefited from this system and these structures, when they see it falling apart, they're not just going to sip tea and say, I guess our time is gone. They're going to try and maintain it, and they're going to get scared. And so that's what I see. This is exactly what it would look like if we were headed in a different direction. And the truth is, this is exactly what it could look like if we're getting ready to roll backwards. So it is a question who we are, and it is a chronicle of racism, not the Chronicle of Racism. And that was very carefully chosen because we're focusing on a community that I'm a part of. And at one of our presentations or screenings, there was a man who said, you know, could you talk a little bit more about the experience of brown people in America, because there's racism there too. And my response was, there's no question about that, but I don't feel like I have the agency to tell that story. I felt like I had the agency to tell a story that my life and my family had been impacted by. And one of the things the Who We Are Project will be doing is working with other advocacy groups to help other people in America who have experienced their chronicle of racism to help tell that story.
Wow, thank you, guys.
Hi, Kathy again. I'm so glad you said that, because even though this film is more through the lens of you and the Black experience, but unless you're white and you're Anglo-Saxon, this country has othered everybody, you know? And the craziness is this country in ideals was founded for religious freedom, freedom from persecution, all of those things, and then turned around and did the same thing. But the thing that I wanted to ask you was, I find it very interesting, I don't want to say it's a phenomenon with white women, but there is a portion of white women that think that they are allies. There's intersectionality, all these funny words, but they're not showing up, or they're not owning their part in this discussion. And it's always like, you know, it's a dismissal. I'm trying to use the nice word here. It's a inability to take responsibility, because we've always said white men have done X, Y, and Z, but it's been with an active participation by white women, and it still is. And there's something about that, like even when you talk about, you know, you're talking about the history and they're trying to put a Band-Aid on it, like it's some type of parade. Why is it so hard to have white women who don't believe in this stuff check their fellow white women and say, you're wrong, this is not correct, because they're always looking to us as women of color or as Black women to do it. And my thing is always like, you need to get your sister or your cousin family is in. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why not drilling down on that? You know what I mean? It's always on us as Black people to fix it.
Well, as white women, we can't speak for all white women, but I definitely recognize what you're saying. And you know, it's interesting. We're both reading a book called "The Sum of Us" now by Heather McGhee. Jeff, you're going to read it next. And she had a theory that you know, I mean, it's sort of like not having white women accept responsibility is like blaming, and only having white men accept responsibility is like blaming the South only right, for enslavement, right? So Heather McGhee had this theory about how it was the freedom, the liberation that white women got from enslavement, is something that's never been acknowledged, because all of a sudden, being a woman, right, at that time period, and the responsibilities that a woman had was a very hard life. And when white women had enslaved people to do tasks for them, they actually had this freedom that they'd never known before, right? So maybe it's this history of that, and not understanding that, and not facing that, and not taking responsibility for the women's liberation coming at the expense of the enslavement of Black people, and Black women in particular, because it was the women that did the roles that relieved the white women of their work. But I think a lot of work needs to be done on that, and I don't know if I certainly don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of the same questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways in which white people avoid responsibility for complicity in racist power structures, right? And definitely it is a pass that white women give themselves. But we also live in a country where white women were predominantly responsible for electing Trump, right? So it's not just white women who think they're on the good side, right? They're actually, white women who are voting who see their self-interest explicitly as deeply aligned with continuing racism, right, and promoting racist power structures. So I don't, what I will say is that being a white person and engaging in this work means getting it wrong a lot of the time, right? And having and letting that be okay, right? I think a lot of the reason why white people, white women included, don't engage with anti-racism, or don't do this work, is because they're afraid of getting called out. They're afraid of doing things wrong. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And it's something that the making of this film kind of involved that deep engaged level of conversation constantly, right? I mean, you can't help it. And the only way to get past it is by talking about it and engaging with it and getting it wrong
and taking risks. I mean, Karen, what you were saying about the Terence Crutcher piece, and the song that he sings, was Sarah found that piece of footage online, and we downloaded it, and then it disappeared. And we got Dr. Tiffany's Crutcher's permission to use it, but in using it, we were so scared, and it means so much to us to hear what you said about it, because it was, we felt such a tremendous responsibility, and we knew we didn't want to mess it up, and we wanted to be respectful, and we didn't know if what we were doing with it, by interweaving it with his murder, was going to be something that we knew it was very heavy. It was very, very heavy. But hearing you say that, and the way that it impacted you, and we've heard I've heard a few other comments, actually all from Black women, about the significance of that song, and hearing him sing it in that moment, and it really means the world to us. So thank you for that.
And I will just say that's an example of, I certainly knew in the presentations that I was giving, I knew about Terence Crutcher, and I was talking about him, but I'd never met his twin sister. And so I had photographs, I had transcripts, I knew what happened. But when I first saw that cut of the film and I saw that moment, I literally had to stop it and then run it back and go, what am I seeing here? And to understand what it was I was seeing and hearing. And it was incredibly impactful. And I feel like as a criminal defense lawyer, but I don't know. I feel like I've been jumping off cliffs my entire life. And it's like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but if it doesn't, guess I'll have to start again. Uh, and so this is jumping off of a cliff. There's no question about it in terms of how will America receive this? Will people be able to see such a difficult film, and what will they get out of it? Are there going to be people who will be upset in a good way, or people who will be upset in a bad way? And I guess we're about to find out. And that to me brings me a good deal of peace, because taking that step and then we'll see what happens is a hell of a lot better than me doing nothing.
No, I agree. We've been too comfortable, and this is how we got here, because we were too comfortable, and it's time for us to become uncomfortable and have those difficult conversations. I know I've had a lot of them with my daughter, and it's really, really hard to be a Black mom. Really, really hard.
Yes.
Oh, there were a couple of other things in the movie that I found really interesting. And two of those were, you were talking about when you were a kid and you wanted to have the woman that came over to your house with the cookies, and you wanted to have a cookie. And also with the basketball team, that you guys weren't allowed to play because you were on the team, and then the Catholic priest said, no, that's not going to happen, and made sure that everyone got to play. And I wanted to know if you could speak on, there's a lot in schools or just in society in general about how young should children be when they learn about race. And one of the arguments is, for Black kids, we're always, Black kids are always learning it. Black people are always learning it. And so I wanted to know if you could speak on that and what those experiences were like for you, especially reliving them.
I think there's a professor at Harvard named Khalil Mohammed who is doing a lot of work in the area of young childhood exposure to racism. And I think he says it better than anybody I've ever heard. The question is not, should your child be taught about racism? Your child is being taught. They're being taught by the culture, by the community, by every image that they see, which is why you can go to the most liberal Montessori school in the country and see kids self-segregate in the first grade lunchroom. That's not because of anything except what we have been teaching them. So, some would say if Ruby Bridges could walk up to a school surrounded by US Marshals at that age, then white kids can learn about it at that age. So I think the age argument is really a smokescreen, because kids are learning about racism from the time they're able to look around and see and talk. There's one of my favorite bands that has a line, "It's in our honey and it's in our milk." And that's how deep racism has gone in this country. What I would say about the experiences I had at the school with my childhood friend and his older brother, the additional context I would put there is that Dick Oriens, who was 10 years older than Opie and I, Opie's older brother, which would have made him about 21 years old when this happened, because we've looked at calendars, and as far as we can tell, this was in either 66 or 67. He would have been 21 years old. This is literally just a couple of years after civil rights workers are disappeared in Mississippi for raising a stink about racial justice. And Dick walking out of that gym and taking his players with him, even though he told us, the clock is broken and the referees haven't shown up, so we're leaving. That was an incredible act. I have no idea where he got the courage to do that. And the fact that his act made that priest go into the gym and back all those other people down is just remarkable. And it was very impactful for me, because I hadn't talked to Dick and Opie in over 30 years. And when I called them about this film, they were just both laughing. Of course we'll talk to you. And when Dick told us that, I didn't know that. I always thought that there was something wrong with the clock and they fixed it. That was a really, Memphis was in many ways the best and the hardest part of this experience for me. Because it got a bit personal. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I was really, really against having stuff about me personally in this film, because I believe very strongly this is not about me. You know, I call my parents unicorns, and all the faces on this Zoom call know that there are Black unicorn parents all over this freaking country who did amazing things to put their children in the pathway of success. So my story is not unique in any or special in any way, shape, or form. But what Sarah and Emily convinced me of is not that it was special, but at least in my way of thinking, was just the opposite. No, it's not special, but it's what Black America has gone through. And you're the one talking in this film. And so it should be a part of the film. And I know that my brothers and sisters are very glad that that was in the film.
Sarah, Emily, and Jeffrey, thank you so much for this powerful piece of work. On behalf of the world's largest group of Black film critics, we thank you for your time, and we thank you for watching this episode of AAFCA Roundtables. Have a great day.